Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Carolina Hills. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The Raven's Perch Inn stood at the crossroads of two forgotten mountain paths in the Carolina Hills for nearly 70 years before the events of 1917. Locals avoided it, but weary travelers still sought refuge within its weathered walls, often with nowhere else to turn as darkness fell across the densely forested valleys. According to county records, Augustine Caldwell acquired the property in 1850, establishing it as a way station for those traveling between Charlotte and the mountain communities. The property itself had a history predating the inn, originally a colonial-era trading post that had fallen into disrepair after the Revolutionary War. The foundations were said to be much older, possibly dating back to early frontier settlements. Augustine's restoration of the property was meticulous, preserving the original stone cellar while expanding the upper floors to accommodate more guests. The Caldwell family archive, discovered in the State Historical Society's repository in 1959, revealed that Augustine had been a peculiar man with interests in both architecture and anatomy, having briefly studied medicine in Philadelphia before abandoning the profession. His journals, covering the years 1850-1871, showed an unusual preoccupation with the resilience of the human vessel, and contained detailed sketches of circulatory systems alongside architectural drawings of the inn's renovation. Upon his death in 1887, the inn passed to his son, Montgomery Caldwell, who managed it with his wife, Dorothea. It was Dorothea's behavior toward the boarders that would later become the subject of hushed conversations throughout 3 counties. The architectural plans for the Raven's Perch, recovered from a county courthouse archive in 1953, revealed peculiarities that went unnoticed during its construction. The original blueprint, submitted for approval in 1850, differed significantly from revised plans Augustine submitted just weeks later. The modifications included unusual hollow spaces within walls, an elaborate network of channels beneath the floorboards, and a cellar with dimensions far exceeding what appeared from the outside. Most notably, the revised plans featured a complex ventilation system that connected every guest room to the cellar through concealed ducts, ostensibly for heating purposes, though subsequent analysis by modern architects suggested the design was more suited to the transmission of sound and the movement of liquids through hidden conduits. Dorothea herself came from uncertain origins. County marriage records list her maiden name as Blackthorne, though no family of that name was registered in the region. Montgomery had reportedly met her while on business in Richmond, bringing her back to the Carolina Hills as his bride in 1909. Photographs preserved in the county historical archives show a striking woman with sharp features and unusually pale eyes that seem to capture light differently than those around her. Local accounts described her as educated and well-spoken, with knowledge of topics unusual for women of that era, particularly chemistry and human physiology. She kept extensive gardens of herbs and plants behind the inn, many of which local apothecaries could not identify. Investigation into Dorothea's background, conducted decades after the events at the Raven's Perch, produced disturbing connections. Blackthorne, who had studied experimental medicine there from 1901 to 1907, specializing in vital fluid dynamics and essence preservation techniques. The Institute's records noted her exceptional aptitude and concerning enthusiasm for procedures typically considered beyond ethical boundaries. Most significantly, correspondence between Institute faculty referenced Blackthorne's connection to the Caldwell methodologies previously documented in American case studies, suggesting a deliberate seeking out of Montgomery based on his family's prior work rather than a chance romantic encounter. Records from the Steiner Institute in Vienna, obtained through diplomatic channels in 1947, revealed a student named D. Records from the Caldwell County Historical Society indicate that by the winter of 1917, the Raven's Perch had developed a curious reputation. Travelers reported excellent care upon arrival, with Dorothea Caldwell offering warm meals and attentive service. Yet these same travelers were often never seen again after checking out, their belongings mysteriously remaining unclaimed. The official ledger, discovered during renovations in 1963, showed that over 37 guests had signed in, but never formally departed. Montgomery Caldwell, described in local newspaper accounts as a man of diminishing presence, was rarely mentioned in travelers' reports, overshadowed by his wife's dominant personality. In January 1917, the first indications of unusual activities began to emerge. Frederick Harwood, a merchant from Atlanta, who stayed at the inn while surveying timber opportunities in the region, wrote in correspondence to his business partner about peculiar renovations taking place. The innkeeper's wife appears to be modifying the guest rooms in a most unusual manner, he noted. When I inquired about the copper tubing being installed behind the walls, she explained it was an innovative heating system, yet I observed that the tubes run downward rather than connecting to any visible source of heat. Harwood departed after a single night, citing discomfort with the watchful nature of Mrs. Caldwell, whose attention never seemed to waver despite the late hour. Harwood's letter, discovered among his business records after his death in 1942, contained additional observations that investigators found significant. He described an unusual interaction with Montgomery Caldwell during his brief stay. The innkeeper himself appears unwell, moving with the deliberate care of one conserving limited strength. When his wife departed the room momentarily, he leaned close and whispered, "Whatever you do not drink the evening tea." Before he could elaborate, Mrs. Caldwell returned, and the man's demeanor changed instantly, his eyes dropping to the floor, his shoulders hunching as if expecting a blow. I observed a silent communication between them, after which Mr. Caldwell excused himself. Most disturbing was the way she watched him leave, not with concern, but with the calculating gaze of one monitoring an experiment's progress. Other guests that winter reported similar discomfort with the atmosphere of the Raven's Perch. Abigail Winchester, a music teacher traveling to a new position in Charlotte, described in her diary feeling observed at all hours during her stay in February 1917. She wrote of hearing soft footsteps outside my door at intervals throughout the night, pausing for several minutes before continuing. Most notably, Winchester documented waking to find a glass of tea beside her bed that she had no recollection of accepting. Upon tasting it, I detected an unusual bitterness beneath the sweetness, she wrote. I disposed of it in the wash basin, which I noticed in the morning had developed peculiar stains where the liquid had touched. Winchester departed immediately after breakfast, one of the last confirmed guests to leave the inn unharmed. Winchester's diary, recovered from her Charlotte residence during the subsequent investigation, contained further details about her observations at breakfast before her hasty departure. The other guests moved as if partially sedated, she wrote. A gentleman who had engaged me in lively conversation about Chopin the previous evening now stared vacantly at his plate, responding to questions with single words or dull nods. When I inquired if he felt unwell, Mrs. Caldwell interjected that many guests experience adjustment difficulty to the mountain elevation. Most disturbing was the moment I observed her adding something from a small vial to his coffee when he glanced away, a practiced motion suggesting routine rather than impulse. When I declined both coffee and tea, citing a desire to depart promptly, her expression changed momentarily to one of frustrated calculation before returning to pleasant hospitality. The first documented irregularity in official records appears in a letter dated March 1917, written by a traveling salesman, Zachariah Powell, to his employer in Charlotte. The letter, preserved in the state archives, expressed concern about the peculiar atmosphere that pervades this establishment and Mrs. Caldwell's unusual attentiveness. Powell noted that despite the inn having 5 vacant rooms, all guests were placed in the east wing, where the walls seemed thinner than elsewhere. He described how Dorothea would stand outside guests' doors at night, her shadow visible beneath the doorframe, sometimes for hours. I observed her making notations in a small leather-bound book after each visit to a guest's room, consulting what appeared to be a pocket watch as she wrote, Powell reported. He also documented unusual sounds emanating from behind the walls, not the settling of an old structure, but rhythmic mechanical movements like a pump or bellows operating at regular intervals. Powell departed hastily the next morning, one of the few confirmed guests to leave the Raven's Perch alive that year. Powell's letter included a diagram of his room's layout with annotations indicating unusual features he had discovered during his stay. He had noted a small panel behind the headboard, concealed by decorative molding that could be slid aside to reveal a narrow opening into the wall cavity. Through this opening, he observed tubes and wires that seemed to connect to the bed frame itself. More disturbing was his discovery of what appeared to be a viewing port in the adjacent wall, disguised as a decorative medallion but positioned to allow observation of the entire room. I conducted an experiment, Powell wrote, placing my hat on the bedpost before retiring to the chair in the corner with my book. Within 20 minutes, I observed the medallion rotate slightly, as if being adjusted to better view the bed. When I abruptly approached the wall, I distinctly heard hurried footsteps retreating through the space between walls. Of particular concern was Powell's description of the other guests during his stay. They appeared oddly subdued at breakfast, he wrote. Their movements were sluggish, their speech slurred. One gentleman who had been quite animated at dinner the previous evening could barely lift his spoon to his lips. When I inquired about his health, Mrs. Caldwell interjected that many travelers experience fatigue from the mountain air and require additional rest. She then guided him back to his room, though he appeared reluctant to return there. Powell's account concluded with an observation that would later prove significant. The floorboards of the dining room are unusually worn in patterns that do not correspond to normal foot traffic, with the deepest impressions forming straight lines from each chair to a central point near the serving table. Local postmaster Hammond Whitaker noted in his personal journal that mail addressed to certain guests at the inn would accumulate for weeks before Montgomery Caldwell would finally collect it, claiming the addressees had moved on without forwarding information. The frequency of such occurrences increased dramatically in the spring and summer of 1917. Whitaker wrote, "The look in Caldwell's eyes when he collects these letters suggests he knows more than he speaks of. There's a hollowness to him now that wasn't there before." Whitaker's journal, recovered after his death in 1943, also contained an observation that investigators would later find significant. The quantity of medical supplies being delivered to the inn has increased tenfold since winter, Mrs. Caldwell now receives regular shipments of items more suited to a hospital than a country lodging: rubber tubing, glass vials, specialized instruments whose purpose I cannot fathom. When questioned, she claims these are for preserving the seasonal harvest from her garden. Yet I have delivered similar supplies to Dr. Thornfield and know them to be medical in nature. Whitaker's position gave him unique insight into communications flowing to and from the Raven's Perch. His journal documented increasingly frantic letters from families inquiring about relatives who had planned to stay at the inn. Today marked the 7th such inquiry this month, he wrote in June 1917. A mother in Philadelphia seeking word of her son, a lawyer who was traveling through our region in May. As with the others, Mrs. Caldwell returned a brief note claiming the gentleman stayed only one night before continuing his journey southward. The registry at the Mapleton Hotel, where she claimed he next lodged, shows no record of his arrival. Whitaker noted that he had begun keeping a private record of these inquiries, documenting a pattern that authorities would later use to establish a timeline of disappearances. Most disturbing were Whitaker's observations regarding changes in Montgomery Caldwell's appearance and behavior throughout 1917. Each month, he seems to diminish," Whitaker wrote in July. "His clothing hangs loose where once it fit well. His complexion has taken on a grayish pallor. His hands tremble continuously. When collecting mail today, he struggled to maintain his grip on the parcels. I inquired about his health, expressing concern, and he began to respond, only to be silenced by the appearance of his wife at his side. She had not entered the post office with him, but appeared with suspicious promptness when our conversation turned personal. The look that passed between them chilled my blood, not a communication between equals, but the silent command of a handler to her charge. Thornfield himself, the nearest physician in the neighboring town of Mapleton, recorded in his medical ledger a house call to the Raven's Perch in April 1917. He was summoned not for a guest, but for Montgomery Caldwell himself, who displayed symptoms of severe malnutrition and what appears to be chronic arsenic exposure. The physician noted his suspicion that Caldwell was being slowly poisoned, but took no action, later explaining to authorities that he feared for his own safety after observing Dorothea's reaction to his diagnosis. She reportedly smiled and said, "My husband has always had a delicate constitution. I prepare special tonics for him daily." The doctor left prescriptions that were never filled at the local apothecary. In his private correspondence with a colleague at the Charlotte Medical College, uncovered during the subsequent investigation, Thornfield expressed deeper concerns. "I observed puncture marks along Montgomery Caldwell's forearms and neck, similar to those made by repeated hypodermic injections. When I inquired about them, Mrs. Caldwell answered before her husband could speak, claiming they resulted from encounters with thorned vegetation while maintaining the grounds. Yet the precision and placement of these marks suggests deliberate medical intervention. More disturbing still was the presence of similar marks on the neck of a young man I glimpsed briefly in an upstairs room, a person who did not appear on the guest register, Mrs. Caldwell showed me, and who seemed unable to rise from his bed." Thornfield's letter contained additional observations from his examination of Montgomery. The patient's blood pressure was remarkably low, yet his pulse maintained a steady, if weak rhythm, suggesting artificial regulation through pharmaceutical means. When I attempted to draw blood for testing, I was startled by its unusual viscosity and coloration, indicating significant alteration from normal human composition. Most concerning were the surgical modifications I observed around his collarbone, evidence of implanted access ports similar to those used in experimental medical facilities for continuous fluid transfer. When I inquired about these modifications, Mrs. Caldwell dismissed my concerns with remarkable technical knowledge, using terminology one would expect from a trained surgeon rather than an innkeeper's wife. Thornfield's suspicions led him to research Dorothea's background, though his inquiries were cut short by his untimely death in May 1917, officially attributed to a carriage accident, though later investigation would raise questions about the circumstances. His notes, discovered hidden in a medical text in his office, documented his findings. No record of D. Caldwell, née Blackthorne, exists in any American medical registry, yet her knowledge of anatomy and pharmaceutical compounds exceeds that of many physicians I have encountered. A colleague at Johns Hopkins confirms that certain European medical institutions have conducted research into vital fluid dynamics that aligns with observations made at the Raven's Perch. Most disturbing is the correlation between Mrs. Caldwell's arrival in the region and a pattern of disappearances extending beyond the inn itself. Travelers reported missing along the roads leading to and from the property with unusual regularity. A significant development came from an unexpected source. Wilhelmina Rhodes, who delivered fresh dairy products to the inn twice weekly, observed peculiar behaviors during her morning deliveries. In testimony given to county officials in late 1918, she recalled how Dorothea would prepare breakfast while singing softly to herself, even when the dining room appeared empty. More troublingly, Rhodes noticed that the amount of food Dorothea prepared seemed excessive for the number of registered guests. When questioned about this, Dorothea reportedly answered, "Some appetites grow larger after sunset." Rhodes also noted that on 3 separate occasions she saw Dorothea carrying large bundles of bed linens to the outdoor fire pit before dawn, despite the morning being laundering day in the normal household schedule. Rhodes' testimony included observations about the physical condition of the inn that would later correspond with investigators' findings. The eastern wing, where guests were housed, had copper pipes running along the exterior walls, disappearing into the ground near the cellar entrance. When I asked their purpose, Mrs. Caldwell explained they were for collecting rainwater, though I noted they were connected to the interior walls rather than the gutters. Rhodes also reported that Dorothea maintained a separate ledger from the official guest register, hidden beneath the reception desk, in which she made notations using a system of symbols rather than conventional writing. "I glimpsed this book only once," Rhodes testified, when Mrs. Caldwell was distracted by a delivery. The pages contained columns of markings alongside room numbers, with what appeared to be measurements or quantities. Perhaps most significantly, Rhodes documented changes to Montgomery Caldwell's appearance over the months of 1917. "He seemed to diminish with each passing week," she stated. "By summer, his clothes hung from a frame that had grown skeletal. His skin had developed a translucent quality, the veins beneath visibly pulsing. Yet Mrs. Caldwell appeared to grow more vibrant in direct proportion to her husband's decline, her complexion brightening, her movements becoming more fluid and assured. On my final delivery in September, I observed Mr. Caldwell seated in the kitchen, connected to some sort of apparatus that transferred a reddish fluid from his arm into a glass container. Mrs. Caldwell explained it as a necessary treatment for his condition prescribed by Dr. Thornfield. I knew this to be false, as the doctor had not visited the inn since April. Rhodes' observations extended to the gardens maintained by Dorothea behind the inn. She cultivated plants I had never encountered in the Carolina Hills, Rhodes testified. When I inquired about certain unusual specimens, she identified them as rare medicinal herbs from Eastern Europe, prized for their unique properties related to blood and vital fluids. Most disturbing was a section of the garden she kept under lock and key. A small greenhouse attached to the kitchen, where she grew plants she refused to name or explain. Through its windows I once observed flowers of unusual coloration that seemed to pulse rhythmically, as if circulating fluid through visible veins in their stems and petals. When I asked about this phenomenon, Mrs. Caldwell merely smiled and said, "They require special nourishment, as do we all." The county tax assessor, Bartholomew Jenkins, conducted an inspection of the property in June 1917. His official report contained an unusual addendum regarding the cellar. Jenkins wrote that while Dorothea offered him a complete tour of the premises, she became markedly agitated when he inquired about accessing the cellar. She insisted it was merely a storage area for preserved foods and household supplies. Yet Jenkins noted the padlock seemed excessive for such purposes. He also documented that the floorboards in the dining room showed signs of frequent scrubbing, worn thinner than one would expect from normal cleaning routines. Most notably, Jenkins recorded the strong smell of lime throughout the lower level of the inn, a substance commonly used in that era to mask odors and accelerate decomposition. The official report included a diagram of the property that investigators would later find crucial. Jenkins had mapped unusual structural modifications to the original building, including a complex system of channels beneath the first floor that appeared to converge at the cellar. He noted that these channels did not correspond to any standard plumbing or heating system of the era. When questioned, Dorothea claimed they were part of the original construction, designed to prevent flooding during heavy rains. Jenkins, however, observed that the woodwork appeared new and detected a viscous residue within the channels that did not appear to be water damage. The tax assessment was completed without cellar access, though Jenkins noted in his personal diary, discovered after his death, that he heard distinct human moaning from behind the locked cellar door as he departed. "The sound was quickly muffled," he wrote, as if a hand had been placed over a mouth. Jenkins's private notes, not included in his official report but later discovered among his personal effects, documented additional observations made during his inspection. The East Wing guest rooms display unusual modifications concealed by seemingly decorative elements. Headboards are attached to wall panels that can be removed, providing access to cavities containing medical apparatus I cannot identify. Beneath each bed, the floorboards have been modified to create shallow collection trays connected to the channel system that runs throughout the structure. Most disturbing was my discovery in room 7, where I observed what appeared to be dried bloodstains on the underside of the mattress, visible only when I conducted a thorough inspection, while Mrs. Caldwell was momentarily called away. Upon her return, she displayed remarkable awareness of my actions despite having been elsewhere in the building, suggesting some form of monitoring system throughout the premises. Montgomery Caldwell's increasingly rare public appearances became the subject of local speculation. Silas Pemberton, proprietor of the general store in nearby Hillsborough, wrote in correspondence to his cousin that Caldwell had transformed into something like a specter by late summer 1917. Pemberton described an encounter in which Caldwell purchased unusual quantities of sedatives and bandages, his hands trembling so severely he could barely count his money. When asked about business at the inn, Caldwell reportedly whispered, "She says they're always hungry, no matter how much she feeds them." Before departing, he added, "I hear them through the walls at night." Their voices change after she serves them her special tea. Pemberton's letter, dated August 30th, 1917, continued with observations about Caldwell's deteriorating physical state. His collar hung loose around a neck that has grown alarmingly thin, yet when it shifted I glimpsed what appeared to be surgical tubing partially embedded in the flesh where his neck meets his shoulder. When he noticed my gaze, he hastily adjusted his clothing and departed, leaving several items he had intended to purchase. Most disturbing was his parting statement, delivered with a vacant stare. "She says I'm helping to advance scientific understanding, that the discomfort is temporary, but the contribution eternal. She promises I won't be like the others, that I'll be maintained." Pemberton documented additional encounters with Montgomery throughout the summer of 1917. In early July, he observed Caldwell attempting to mail a letter secretly, bypassing the local post office where Whitaker might have recorded it. "He approached me with unusual urgency," Pemberton wrote, pressing an envelope into my hands with instructions to post it in Charlotte during my next supply run. The letter was addressed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, marked "Urgent Human Experimentation." Before I could question him further, Dorothea appeared at the store entrance. Montgomery's demeanor changed instantly, his spine straightening, his expression emptying of emotion. He retrieved the letter with a mechanical movement, claiming he had mistaken the address. As they departed together, I observed that he walked exactly 3 paces behind her, like a man tethered by an invisible leash. The turning point in understanding what transpired at the Raven's Perch came from the testimony of Josephine Mercer, a seamstress who was commissioned by Dorothea to create special garments in August 1917. According to Mercer's sworn statement dated November 1918, Dorothea requested several sets of restraints disguised as decorative bedding accessories. The specifications were precise, strong enough to secure an adult's limbs to a bed frame, but appearing ornamental to the casual observer. Mercer, needing the business, completed the order, but her suspicions grew when Dorothea requested a second set barely 2 weeks later, claiming the first had worn through. Upon delivery of the second order, Mercer reported hearing a low moaning like wounded animals coming from behind the locked cellar door. When she inquired about the sound, Dorothea attributed it to the peculiar way the wind moves through the chimney when the barometric pressure changes. Mercer's testimony included detailed descriptions of the materials Dorothea specified for these restraints: reinforced canvas lined with soft cotton to prevent visible bruising, leather fastenings designed to tighten with resistance rather than loosen, and, most unusually, integrated tubes that Dorothea explained were for administering nourishment to invalids who might thrash in delirium. Mercer also noted that Dorothea commissioned special nightclothes with openings at specific points along the arms, legs, and neck, ostensibly for ease of medical treatment. These garments were ordered in various sizes, suggesting they were not intended for a single individual. Perhaps most disturbing was Mercer's account of the conversation that occurred during her final fitting at the inn. Mrs. Caldwell spoke at length about her theories regarding human vitality, Mercer testified. She described the body as a vessel containing essence that could be transferred under proper conditions. When I expressed confusion, she elaborated that certain individuals possessed stronger essences than others, identifiable through various characteristics: bright eyes, quick movements, vibrant complexion. These traits, she claimed, indicated a person whose essence would be particularly potent if properly harvested. Mercer departed hastily, declining further commissions despite Dorothea's generous offers. Mercer's final interaction with Dorothea occurred in late August, when she delivered the second set of restraints. Upon entering the inn, she testified, I was struck by an unusual silence despite the guest register indicating near capacity. When I commented on the quiet, Mrs. Caldwell explained that her guests were participating in an extended rest cure in their rooms. As we discussed the final payment, I glimpsed a diagram on her desk, what appeared to be a human body with specific points marked along the major blood vessels, annotated with measurements and formulas. When she noticed my attention, she covered the diagram casually, but with a calculated precision that suggested the information was sensitive. Most unsettling was her parting comment as I left. Your measurements would suggest exceptional vitality, Ms. Mercer. Should you ever require accommodation in our establishment, I would be most interested in assessing your particular qualities. The first concrete evidence came from an unexpected quarter. Rutherford Davis, a photographer documenting historic structures in the Carolina Hills for a state preservation project, stayed at the Raven's Perch in September 1917. In his field journal, recovered after his disappearance, Davis wrote about awakening in the night to find Dorothea standing at the foot of his bed, simply watching him. He feigned sleep, but observed through nearly closed eyes as she added something to the water pitcher on his nightstand. Suspicious, Davis emptied the water into a potted plant, which he noted was dead by morning. He planned to depart immediately, but discovered his horse had been unsaddled, the tack hidden. Forced to stay another night, he barricaded his door and documented the sounds that came from adjacent rooms. Shuffling movements, like those of restrained persons, whispered conversations through walls, Mrs. Caldwell's voice, soothing at first, then commanding. The sound of liquid being poured, followed by silence. Davis escaped the following day by claiming an urgent telegraph had summoned him to Charlotte, but not before secretly photographing the cellar door, which showed scratch marks along its lower edge. Davis's journal contained a previously overlooked detail that investigators would later find significant. During his second night, while documenting the sounds from adjacent rooms, Davis reported hearing Dorothea instructing someone. The extraction process requires precision. Too rapid, and the essence becomes tainted with fear. Too slow, and the vitality diminishes before collection is complete. We must maintain consciousness without allowing full awareness. The vessel must remain functional but compliant. These instructions were followed by mechanical sounds, what Davis described as a pump activating, followed by a wet, gurgling flow through the walls. Davis documented his attempt to investigate the sounds more thoroughly during his second night. Using my pocket knife, he wrote, I carefully removed a section of the baseboard where the unusual sounds seemed loudest. Behind the wall, I discovered a complex network of tubes, some glass, others copper, carrying fluids of varying colors and viscosities. Most disturbing was a larger tube, approximately 1 inch in diameter, that pulsed rhythmically with the passage of a thick, dark liquid. I followed this tube's path by removing additional sections of baseboard, tracing it to a junction beneath the floor where it connected to similar tubes from adjacent rooms. All appeared to flow downward, presumably to the cellar below. Before I could investigate further, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. I hastily replaced the baseboards and returned to my defensive position behind the barricaded door. The photographs Davis took, developed months later after authorities recovered his equipment from his abandoned Charlotte apartment, provided crucial visual evidence. Beyond the scratched cellar door, Davis had captured images of modifications to his room that would have been invisible to casual observation. A small panel behind the headboard, slightly ajar, revealing tubing that connected to the wall, markings on the floorboards indicating the recent movement of the bed to conceal something beneath, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be a viewing port disguised as a decorative wall feature, allowing someone to observe the room's occupant from the adjacent wall space. Davis's final entry, dated September 17, 1917, contained a chilling observation about Montgomery Caldwell. I encountered the innkeeper this morning as I prepared for departure. He appeared severely unwell, moving with the difficulty of a man decades older than his actual age. When Mrs. Caldwell was momentarily occupied with another guest, he gripped my arm with surprising strength and whispered, "She preserves parts of them, keeps them conscious. The essence requires awareness to remain potent." Before he could elaborate, his wife returned, and his demeanor transformed entirely, his eyes vacant, his posture submissive. As I departed, I observed her guiding him toward the east wing, one hand firmly on his back in what appeared to be a gesture of affection, but functioned as clear control. In early October 1917, a disturbing incident brought unwanted attention to the Raven's Perch. Quentin Hargrove, a guest who had checked in the previous evening, was found wandering the road to Hillsborough in a state of extreme disorientation. The local sheriff's report indicates Hargrove was suffering from exposure and confusion, repeatedly muttering about the feeding time and what she puts in the walls. When lucid enough for questioning, Hargrove claimed he had awakened in the night to find himself partially restrained, with Dorothea Caldwell standing over him, holding a funnel and a ceramic jug. He had managed to free one arm and struck her, then fled through a window. Medical examination revealed needle marks on his arms and neck. Most disturbingly, analysis of his blood by a physician in Charlotte showed traces of an unidentified compound that had properties similar to both sedatives and preservatives. Hargrove's testimony prompted the sheriff to issue a warrant to search the Raven's Perch, but by the time officers arrived 3 days later, both Dorothea and Montgomery Caldwell had vanished. Hargrove's medical evaluation, conducted by Dr. Lawrence Sutherland at Charlotte Medical College, revealed anomalies beyond the needle marks and unknown compounds in his bloodstream. The patient exhibits a peculiar form of anemia, Sutherland noted in his report, with blood showing characteristics of having been partially replaced with a solution intended to maintain vital functions while decreasing overall volume. Hargrove's cognitive functions were also affected in ways consistent with prolonged exposure to specific alkaloid compounds, many derived from plants that investigators later found growing in Dorothea's extensive gardens. Most significantly, Hargrove's description of his partial restraint matched exactly the specifications of the special garments commissioned from Josephine Mercer. During his more lucid moments, Hargrove provided details that aligned with physical evidence later discovered at the inn. He described Dorothea speaking to him in soothing tones about his exceptional vitality and how he would contribute to something greater than himself. He recalled her explaining a process whereby his essence would nourish others worthy of continuation. Most disturbing was his recollection of Dorothea telling him that the process had been refined over generations and that the Raven's Perch had been specifically modified to facilitate optimal extraction conditions. When asked why, he had been selected, Hargrove recalled Dorothea saying, Your eyes hold the brightness of exceptional life force. Such vitality, properly harvested, can sustain others for considerable periods. Hargrove's testimony included a description of other guests he had briefly observed during his short stay. In the room adjacent to mine, he stated, I glimpsed a man through the partially open door as Mrs. Caldwell led me to my quarters. He was seated upright in bed, staring vacantly at the wall, connected to some form of apparatus that joined tubes from his arms and neck to the wall behind him. His complexion had a grayish cast, his breathing shallow but regular. Most disturbing was his complete lack of reaction to our passing. No eye movement, no acknowledgement of our presence, yet he was clearly conscious. When I inquired about the man's condition, Mrs. Caldwell explained he was recovering from mountain fever and required specialized treatment that she, with her extensive medical training, was uniquely qualified to provide. What authorities discovered at the abandoned inn defied immediate explanation. The cellar, finally unlocked, contained an elaborate system of tubes and funnels connected to the guest rooms above. According to the official report filed by Sheriff Gideon Blackburn, the tubes allowed liquids to be transferred from the cellar directly to hidden outlets behind the headboards in the guest rooms. More disturbing were the restraint systems affixed to each bed frame, concealed by decorative canopies and bedding. The walls of several guest rooms had been modified to include small observation ports, allowing someone to watch the occupants without being detected. Blackburn's report, sealed until 1960 due to its disturbing content, detailed modifications to the inn that went beyond what earlier visitors had observed. The East Wing guest rooms featured concealed compartments within the walls, accessible from hidden passages where a person could stand to observe and access the room's occupant. Each of these compartments contained a small desk with monitoring equipment, notebooks, measuring devices, and what appeared to be medical instruments for drawing blood and administering injections. Most disquieting were the labels affixed to each compartment, categorizing rooms not by number but by extraction potential, ranging from minimal to exceptional. The most significant discovery, however, was hidden behind a false wall in the cellar, a makeshift laboratory containing dozens of glass containers, each filled with various compounds. Analysis by chemists from the Charlotte Medical College identified many as uncommon sedatives, paralytics, and preservative solutions. Journals found in this space, written in Dorothea's precise handwriting, detailed experiments with these substances on subjects identified only by room number and date of arrival. The entries documented reactions, dosages, and effectiveness with clinical detachment. One recurring notation appeared particularly frequently: preservation of consciousness during procedure remains the primary objective. The laboratory contained equipment far beyond what would be expected in a rural inn in 1917. Custom-designed glass vessels connected by intricate tubing allowed for the collection and separation of bodily fluids. A specialized centrifuge, modified from medical designs of the era, enabled the separation of components within these fluids. Most unsettling was a device that investigators initially could not identify, later determined to be a primitive transfusion apparatus, allowing for the direct transfer of processed fluids from one vessel to another. Accompanying this equipment were detailed anatomical drawings identifying optimal extraction points on the human body, with annotations regarding the quality of essence obtainable from each location. The cellar laboratory's most disturbing feature was a section separated from the main area by a heavy curtain. Behind this partition, investigators discovered what Blackburn's report described as a processing chamber, a room containing a metal table with restraints, surrounded by collection devices connected to the tube system that ran throughout the building. The table was designed with channels that directed fluids to collection points and featured adjustable sections allowing for precise positioning of subjects. Nearby shelving contained specialized instruments for accessing veins, arteries, and other vessels, many modified from standard medical tools to allow for ongoing extraction rather than single procedures. Most unsettling was a cabinet containing dozens of small vials, each labeled with a guest's name and room number, containing what analysis would later identify as preserved human tissue samples, organized by what Dorothea's notes referred to as essence quality. Dorothea's journals spanning January to October 1917 revealed a methodical approach to what she termed essence extraction. Early entries focused on determining optimal sedative combinations, those that would render a subjects compliant while maintaining vital functions and a level of consciousness she deemed necessary for quality preservation. Later entries documented refinements to the extraction process itself, with particular attention to maintaining subjects through multiple collection sessions rather than single, terminal extractions. The vessel properly maintained can provide superior essence for up to 14 days before quality diminishes significantly, one entry noted. Nourishment via specialized solutions extends viability, though essence potency decreases proportionally to vessel deterioration. The journals contained detailed observations on the effects of different extraction methods on both the donor vessels, as she referred to her subjects, and the recipient vessels, primarily herself and, increasingly, Montgomery. Entries from February documented early experiments. Subject responds well to extraction rates of 2 cc per hour, maintaining consciousness and vital functions. Essence quality remains high, with immediate positive effects upon consumption. Montgomery shows improved vigor for approximately 6 hours following 15 cc administration, though this duration decreases with each subsequent application, suggesting adaptation or resistance developing in the recipient vessel. Must investigate methods to enhance absorption and extend effect duration. By June, the entries indicated significant refinements. Discovered that emotional states directly impact essence quality. Fear produces a short-term increase in potency, but accelerates vessel deterioration. Calm acceptance yields more sustainable results. Have developed a 3-phase protocol: initial anxiety induction, followed by chemical stabilization, concluding with prolonged extraction during a maintained state of resigned awareness. Results show 40% improvement in potency duration for recipient vessel. Later entries documented experiments with combining essences from multiple subjects, with Dorothea noting that certain combinations yield synergistic effects, particularly when donors possess complementary qualities. Intellectual acuity paired with physical vitality produces essence of remarkable potency. Perhaps most disturbing were the modifications to the dining room. Beneath the worn floorboards, investigators discovered a complex system of collection trays and drainage channels, leading to storage containers in the cellar. As one deputy noted in his report, the entire first floor was designed to capture and preserve bodily fluids. Analysis of residue found in these channels identified human blood, lymphatic fluid, and other substances that the medical examiners declined to specify in public records. The dining room's design revealed a secondary function beyond serving meals. The chairs were subtly modified with nearly invisible restraints that could be activated from beneath the table. The table itself contained hidden compartments accessible from below, allowing for the insertion of collection devices without guests' awareness. Most disturbing was the discovery of a mechanism beneath the serving station that, when activated, would lock all dining room doors simultaneously. As investigators pieced together the evidence, it became apparent that the dining room served as the initial processing area, where guests would be rendered compliant before transportation to the more specialized facilities in the East Wing. Deputies discovered that the serving hatch connecting the dining room to the kitchen concealed a complex apparatus for administering substances to guests' food and drink without detection. A system of labeled dispensers allowed for individualized dosing based on what Dorothea's notes referred to as subject quality assessment, apparently conducted during initial interactions with new arrivals. The dining chairs themselves contained subtle pressure sensors, connected to recording devices in the cellar, documenting physiological responses like heart rate and breathing patterns as guests consumed doctored meals. According to technical analysis conducted by engineers from Charlotte, the entire dining room functioned as an assessment chamber where Dorothea could evaluate potential subjects before selecting those with optimal essence qualities for more extensive processing in the East Wing. The case took another turn when a journal belonging to Montgomery Caldwell was discovered behind a loose brick in the kitchen fireplace. The entries, spanning January to September 1917, revealed a man descending into terror within his own home. In increasingly unsteady handwriting, Montgomery documented his growing awareness of his wife's activities, his own poisoning, and his unsuccessful attempts to warn guests. A particularly chilling entry from July read, "I attempted to speak with a gentleman in room 3, but D observed our interaction and increased my tonic dosage that evening. Awoke restrained to our bed as she explained the necessity of my silence. She believes she is perfecting a method of extending usefulness beyond natural limitations. God forgive me for my cowardice." Montgomery's journal provided insight into how Dorothea selected her subjects. "She examines them during their first meal," he wrote in April. "Those with what she calls bright essence, typically younger travelers with clear eyes and energetic dispositions, are assigned to the East Wing, where the apparatus is most refined. Others, deemed less optimal, are processed more quickly and discarded. She maintains that every person carries a quantifiable vital essence that, properly extracted and preserved, can be transferred to another." Later entries revealed that Montgomery himself had become both test subject and unwilling assistant, with Dorothea using various compounds to ensure his compliance while maintaining his ability to perform necessary functions for the inn's operation. Perhaps most disturbing were Montgomery's descriptions of his wife's transformation throughout 1917. "She has changed since beginning the concentrated consumption," he wrote in August. "Her movements have become more fluid, her complexion luminous, her eyes brighter. After administering the refined extract to herself, she exhibits renewed vitality for approximately 3 days, after which she grows agitated until the next processing is complete. She no longer sleeps beside me, but spends nights in the cellar laboratory, refining her techniques and consuming the essences she has collected. Sometimes I hear her speaking to someone down there, though we have no assistance. The voice that responds is not human." Montgomery's final entries, dated early October 1917, revealed a man facing his own mortality with growing clarity. "I understand now that I am merely another subject to her," he wrote on October 2nd. "My role as husband provided convenient cover for the establishment, but my primary value has always been as a test vessel for her formulations. The partial dosing I receive maintains minimal function while allowing her to observe long-term effects of essence consumption. I am simultaneously subject and witness, experimental model, and reluctant participant. Each day, more of my own essence is extracted and processed, replaced with solutions that maintain basic functions while diminishing my will to resist. I write these notes during brief periods of clarity, hoping someone will understand what transpired here after we are gone." She speaks increasingly of the next phase and a permanent facility elsewhere. "I believe she intends to abandon the Raven's Perch soon, taking select subjects and equipment to continue her work in a location beyond scrutiny." Testimony from neighboring farms revealed that unusual deliveries had become commonplace at the Raven's Perch throughout 1917. Large quantities of salt, lime, special alcohols typically used for preservation, and unusual pharmaceutical compounds were regularly delivered, often at Dorothea's specific request. Vincent Holloway, who operated the region's only freight service, reported delivering heavy equipment ordinarily used in medical settings, including an apparatus he described as similar to those used for blood transfusions, but modified in ways I didn't understand. Holloway's records, submitted during the investigation, showed a pattern of deliveries that corresponded with peaks in reported guest disappearances. Most significantly, he documented conversations with Dorothea regarding the handling of these deliveries. She insisted certain items be delivered after sunset when guests were typically at dinner. These items were always taken directly to the cellar entrance, rather than the main door. When I inquired about their unusual nature, Mrs. Caldwell explained they were for medical research to benefit humanity. She spoke of extending the useful duration of the human condition and once referenced her predecessor's work in similar research. Of particular note was Holloway's observation of gradual changes to the inn's structure throughout 1917. With each delivery of building materials, he stated in his testimony, the east wing became more isolated from the main structure. Additional locks appeared on connecting doors. New pipes and tubing were installed running from guest rooms down into the ground, presumably connecting to the cellar. Mrs. Caldwell supervised these modifications personally, referring to architectural drawings that appeared far more complex than simple renovations would require. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a horrifying picture emerged. Dorothea Caldwell had apparently been experimenting with methods of extracting and preserving vital essences from living subjects, believing these substances could extend life and vitality when properly processed and consumed. The tubes, collection systems, and restraints all supported a methodology whereby guests were immobilized, kept in a semi-conscious state, and systematically drained of various bodily fluids over extended periods. The technical sophistication of Dorothea's operation confounded contemporary medical experts consulted during the investigation. Dr. Edward Winslow of Johns Hopkins University, who examined the equipment recovered from the cellar laboratory, noted in his assessment, the design principles employed in these extraction and preservation devices reflect knowledge of human physiology that exceeds current medical understanding. The methods of maintaining subjects in a controlled state of semi-consciousness while extracting specific bodily components would require extensive experimentation and a level of anatomical knowledge typically found only in advanced research facilities, not a rural inn. This disparity led to speculation that Dorothea had either received specialized training from an unknown source or had access to medical knowledge not generally available in that era. Most disturbing were the indications that Dorothea had been refining techniques to keep her subjects alive and aware during these procedures. Entries in her journal referred to a sweet spot between sedation and alertness, where extraction could be maximized without losing the essential quality she sought. Later entries suggested she believed consciousness and terror enhanced the potency of these extractions, leading her to deliberately ensure subjects remained partially aware during the procedures. One journal entry from September 1917 was particularly revealing. Subject 27 yielded exceptional results when allowed to fully comprehend the extraction process before administration of partial sedation. The heightened emotional state appears to concentrate the essence, particularly when fear transitions to acceptance. The moment of surrender produces a distinct change in quality, a sweetness that dissipates with unconsciousness. Maintaining this precise emotional state throughout extraction significantly increases potency of the final product. The fate of Montgomery Caldwell became clearer when investigators discovered a small room adjacent to the kitchen, accessible only through a disguised panel. Inside was a bed with the same restraint system found in guest rooms, surrounded by empty glass containers and feeding tubes. The wall facing the bed was covered with small markings, which analysts later determined were made by fingernails, as if someone had been counting days. Among Montgomery's personal effects was a letter addressed to his sister in Baltimore, never sent, in which he wrote, "I have become both witness and unwilling participant in Dee's work. She tests her concoctions on me first, perfecting the balance before administering to guests. I am kept functional enough to maintain appearances, but never strong enough to flee or resist. Each day I pray for the courage to end this, for us both." Forensic examination of the hidden room revealed evidence that Montgomery had been subjected to the same extraction procedures as guests, though modified for longer-term sustainability. The feeding tubes contained residue of a specialized nutritional solution designed to maintain essential functions while facilitating continued harvesting. Analysis of leather restraints showed they had been in place for months, adjusted periodically to accommodate Montgomery's diminishing frame. Most telling was a journal kept by Dorothea, separate from her technical notes, in which she documented her husband's contributions to her research. M's essence has weakened considerably with continued extraction, yet the familial connection appears to create a baseline compatibility that enhances absorption. His diminishment directly correlates to my enhancement, a connection that suggests essence transfer operates most effectively between bonded individuals. Perhaps the most chilling evidence came from Dorothea's private study. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was a manuscript titled "Extending the Vessel: Methods of Essence Extraction and Application," which detailed her theories and techniques. The document revealed that she believed certain individuals possessed stronger life essences than others, identifiable by various traits she would assess during their first meal at the inn. Those deemed to have the strongest essences would be selected for her most extensive procedures. The manuscript included detailed drawings of the human circulatory system with specific collection points marked, along with formulas for solutions that would maintain the vessel while harvesting its contents. The manuscript contained references to earlier work in this field, suggesting Dorothea was continuing research begun by others. Several passages mentioned the European methodologies and the foundation established at the Vienna laboratory, though no records of such research could be located in legitimate medical archives. Of particular note was a section titled "Improvements to the Caldwell Methodology," suggesting a connection to Augustine Caldwell's earlier experiments. This connection was strengthened by the discovery of hidden compartments in Augustine's original journals, containing coded notations that, when deciphered by investigators, revealed similar, though less refined, extraction techniques dating back to the 1860s. Most disturbing was Dorothea's documentation of the effects of consuming the extracted essences. Initial application produces heightened sensory awareness and vitality, she wrote. Consistent consumption leads to more lasting changes, improved cellular regeneration, enhanced cognitive function, and a gradual transformation of the consumer's physical form. The ultimate objective remains the permanent transfer of essence, whereby the consumer's deteriorating vessel is revitalized through complete absorption of a donor's vital qualities. The manuscript concluded with speculations on achieving what Dorothea termed complete transference, a process whereby the consumer would not merely be enhanced by the donor's essence, but would effectively absorb their entire being. In November 1918, a year after the discovery of the abandoned inn, a report came from a hospital in Richmond, Virginia. A woman matching Dorothea Caldwell's description had been admitted with severe burns after a chemical accident in a rented room. She died before authorities could investigate fully, but among her possessions was found a small case containing vials of a viscous red substance and a journal with entries suggesting she had continued her work. The final entry, dated 3 days before her death, read, "The preservation methods remain imperfect. The essence loses potency when separated from its living source. A continuous connected extraction system may be the only viable approach, must find suitable permanent accommodations." The attending physician at the Richmond Hospital, Dr. Nathaniel Harper, provided a detailed account of the woman's condition upon admission and subsequent death. The patient exhibited unusual physiological characteristics, he noted in his report. Despite severe burns covering approximately 40% of her body, she remained lucid and displayed remarkable resilience. Tissue samples revealed cellular structures inconsistent with normal human physiology, showing enhanced regenerative properties and abnormal density. Most notably, her blood contained components I cannot identify, with properties suggesting artificial modification. Harper also documented the woman's last words, spoken just before her death. "The vessel fails, but the essence persists. Find the others. Continue the work." Investigation of the rented room where the accident occurred revealed equipment similar to that found in the cellar of the Raven's Perch, though more compact and refined. Neighbors reported that the woman had taken up residence 2 months prior, introducing herself as Dr. Eleanor Blackthorne and claiming to be conducting research on extending human vitality. Several local residents had visited her for consultations but were never seen again. Authorities discovered a trapdoor in the floor leading to a small chamber containing evidence of continued experimentation, including partially constructed extraction apparatus and journals documenting new techniques developed since leaving the inn. Montgomery Caldwell's fate remains officially undetermined. No remains were ever definitively identified as his, though investigators noted that certain chemical compounds found in the cellar were capable of dissolving organic matter completely. Some speculate he was Dorothea's final subject at the Raven's Perch. Others believe he may have escaped and assumed a new identity. A man matching his description was reported in several southern cities throughout 1918, appearing disoriented and warning strangers not to accept hospitality from unfamiliar women. These accounts, however, remain unverified. Reports of this mysterious figure continued sporadically into the 1920s. Thaddeus Monroe, a physician in Savannah, documented treating a man in 1921 who matched Montgomery's description and exhibited unusual medical characteristics. The patient's circulatory system showed evidence of prolonged interference, Monroe wrote in his case notes. Veins and arteries had been repeatedly accessed, using techniques I have not encountered in legitimate medical practice. Of particular note were modified entry points that had healed in a manner suggesting they had been specifically prepared for regular access. The patient refused to explain these modifications, but spoke repeatedly of her collection methods and warned that she finds those with the brightest essence. The man disappeared from Monroe's care before further documentation could be obtained. The final toll of Dorothea Caldwell's activities at the Raven's Perch cannot be precisely determined. The inn's ledger showed 43 guests between January and October 1917, of whom only 6 were confirmed to have departed safely. No remains were recovered from the property, though forensic evidence suggested that the drainage system had been thoroughly flushed before the Caldwells' disappearance. Chemical analysis of soil samples from the surrounding property showed traces of compounds consistent with those found in the cellar, suggesting disposal of significant volumes of biological materials over an extended period. Examination of the area surrounding the inn revealed additional disturbing evidence. A series of underground channels extended from the cellar into the nearby woods, terminating at a natural sinkhole approximately half a mile from the property. This geological formation, tested during the investigation, showed high concentrations of lime and organic compounds consistent with decomposed human remains. However, the combination of chemical treatments and natural decomposition made it impossible to determine the number of individuals whose remains might have been disposed of in this manner. In 1963, during a renovation of the long-abandoned structure, workers discovered a sealed chamber beneath what had been the dining room floor. Inside were hundreds of small glass vials, each labeled with a date and room number. Only one contained any remaining substance, a dark, desiccated residue that analysts described as partially preserved human tissue with unusual chemical modifications. The chamber was hurriedly sealed again and the renovation project abandoned. Dr. Victoria Chambers of the State Medical Examiner's Office, who analyzed the single preserved sample in 1963, noted its unusual properties. The tissue sample displays cellular modifications inconsistent with natural human physiology. More disturbing is evidence suggesting the tissue remained metabolically active after extraction, continuing biological processes without standard life support. Her report, classified until 1980, concluded that the sample represented an attempt to maintain human tissue in a state between life and death, preserving essential functions while allowing for controlled extraction of components. The Raven's Perch was finally demolished in 1968 after several unexplained accidents during attempted restorations. The cells appear to have been altered to maintain viability outside the body for extended periods, a preservation technique beyond current medical capabilities. Construction workers reported equipment failures, structural collapses, and inexplicable health symptoms while working on the property. One worker, Harrison Dalton, described finding additional hidden passages within the walls during demolition. The entire structure was designed like a web, with observation points and access panels connecting every room to concealed corridors. The architectural precision suggested this wasn't a modification, but the building's intended purpose from its construction. Most disturbing were the scratch marks on the inside of these passages, as if someone had been sealed within the walls themselves. The County Historical Society maintains a file on the case, though certain documents remain restricted. The most complete account comes from Detective Sebastian Thorne, who led the original investigation and continued researching the case until his death in 1952. In his final report he wrote, "What transpired at the Raven's Perch represents something beyond ordinary human depravity. Dorothea Caldwell did not merely kill. She sought to extend her existence through the systematic extraction of life from others, developing methodologies that blurred the boundary between victim and resource." Most disturbing was her clinical approach, the dispassionate documentation of suffering as merely data points in her grand experiment. Thorne's personal papers, unsealed in 1969, revealed his ongoing investigation had uncovered evidence of similar cases throughout the eastern United States dating back to the 1850s. He had identified 7 other locations with architectural modifications resembling those at the Raven's Perch, each associated with disappearances, and each operated by individuals with direct or indirect connections to either Dorothea or Augustin Caldwell. Most significantly, Thorne had traced a lineage of research in essence extraction through correspondence between these individuals, suggesting an organized, multi-generational effort rather than isolated incidents. Thorne's closing observation remains the most unsettling aspect of the case. We cannot be certain that her techniques did not work, at least partially. The woman who died in Richmond may not have been Dorothea Caldwell at all, but another victim. The true Dorothea may still exist in some form, sustained by what she harvested from those unfortunate souls who checked into her establishment, but never truly checked out. This theory gained credibility in 1957, when Elijah Worthington, a retired sheriff's deputy who had participated in the original investigation, reported encountering a woman in Charleston who bore a striking resemblance to Dorothea Caldwell. Though 40 years had passed, Worthington wrote in a statement to authorities, she appeared not to have aged more than a decade. When our eyes met, she showed momentary recognition before disappearing into the crowd. Most disturbing was not her youthful appearance, but the fact that she was accompanied by a man who precisely matched Montgomery Caldwell's description. Yet he appeared elderly, frail, moving with the assistance of a medical device connected to his arm that resembled the extraction apparatus found at the inn. The site where the Raven's Perch once stood remains vacant, a conspicuous, empty space along the old mountain road. Locals avoid the area, particularly after sunset. Some claim to hear distant sounds of liquid dripping on certain quiet nights. Others report glimpsing a slender female figure standing at what would have been the inn's entrance, watching the road as if waiting for weary travelers. These accounts are, of course, unverified, likely nothing more than the natural human tendency to embellish historical tragedies with supernatural elements. What remains indisputable, however, is the methodical nature of what occurred within those walls in 1917, the systematic exploitation of human trust and vulnerability by someone who viewed others not as people, but as vessels containing something she desperately coveted. In that sense, what the innkeeper's wife did to her boarders was indeed worse than conventional narratives of murder or madness might suggest. She did not merely take their lives, she extracted their essence while ensuring they remained conscious enough to experience the process, converting living beings into resources to be harvested, one carefully measured drop at a time. The most troubling question, never satisfactorily answered, is what drove an apparently ordinary woman to develop such elaborate methods of extraction and preservation. Dorothea's background revealed no medical training or scientific education that would explain her sophisticated understanding of human physiology or chemical preservation. Yet her journals displayed knowledge that experts claimed was decades ahead of contemporary medical science. This discrepancy led some investigators to speculate that her techniques may have been learned rather than developed, passed down through some unidentified lineage or discovered in obscure texts. If so, the raven's perch may not have been an isolated incident, but merely one manifestation of a methodology practiced elsewhere, perhaps continuing to the present day. This theory was supported by discoveries made during the investigation of Augustine Caldwell's background. Research revealed that before purchasing the property that would become the raven's perch, he had traveled extensively in Eastern Europe, particularly regions of Romania and Hungary, associated with folk beliefs about extending life through consuming essences of the young. His personal library, partially recovered from a storage facility in Charlotte in 1949, contained rare manuscripts on historical practices of blood consumption and essence transfer, with his own annotations suggesting practical experimentation rather than mere academic interest. Most significantly, investigators discovered correspondence between Augustine and researchers in Vienna and Paris, discussing methodologies for separating vital essence from its original vessel and transference protocols to ensure maximum absorption. The case file remains open, technically unsolved. The Carolina Hills Historical Society maintains the collected evidence, though access is strictly limited. Those who have studied the materials most thoroughly often emerge with the same disturbing observation. The precision of Dorothea's method suggests practice beyond what could have occurred during her tenure at the Raven's Perch. The inn may have been the culmination of her work rather than its beginning, a purpose-built facility designed after years of less efficient experimentation elsewhere. If so, there may be other sites with similar modifications waiting to be discovered, other ledgers with names of guests who checked in but never truly departed. Periodic reports throughout the decades following the Raven's Perch investigation have suggested the continuation of similar practices. In 1932, authorities in Western Virginia documented a case involving a remote sanitarium where patients were found connected to apparatus resembling that discovered at the inn. In 1948, a private hospital outside Atlanta was shut down after patients reported being partially sedated and connected to transfusion equipment without their consent. Most recently, in 1965, investigators uncovered a wellness retreat in the Tennessee mountains that featured architectural modifications identical to those at the Raven's Perch, including hidden observation ports and a sophisticated drainage system beneath patient rooms. As modern travelers pass through the Carolina Hills, few realize they are driving past the former location of the Raven's Perch. The roadside historical marker makes only vague reference to tragic events at a former lodging establishment. Perhaps this discretion is wise. Some methodologies, once understood, cannot be unlearned. Some appetites, once acknowledged, cannot be dismissed as mere aberration. The story of what the innkeeper's wife did to her boarders serves as a reminder that the most disturbing predators are those who view their prey not with hatred or rage, but with clinical curiosity, those who see in others not an enemy to destroy, but a resource to be methodically harvested. The final piece of evidence in the case came to light in 1962, when an elderly man in a Charleston nursing home claimed on his deathbed to be Wellington Morris, a commercial traveler who had stayed at the Raven's Perch in August 1917. According to the attending physician, the man described escaping during his second night after observing Dorothea adding substances to his evening tea. He claimed to have witnessed her entering another guest's room carrying equipment no innkeeper should possess, and fled through his window without his belongings. Most disturbing was his insistence that, as he crept past the kitchen window, he observed Dorothea and Montgomery drinking from crystal glasses filled with a thick red liquid, their faces transformed with each swallow into something younger, more vital. The man died before investigators could formally interview him, and his true identity was never confirmed. The physician who documented Morris's account, he recalled specific modifications to the guest rooms, including hollow areas behind the walls where she would stand, watching through hidden ports. Most significantly, he described witnessing Dorothea accessing these concealed passages through a mechanism beneath the main staircase, a feature only discovered during the final demolition of the property in 1968, 6 years after the patient's death. Whether the full extent of what transpired at the Raven's Perch will ever be known remains doubtful. Samuel Lawson noted additional details that aligned with evidence from the original investigation. The patient described architectural features of the Raven's Perch that were not included in any public records, Lawson wrote. What is clear is that beneath the veneer of hospitality lay a calculated methodology of extraction and consumption that treated human beings as reservoirs of something precious, something Dorothea Caldwell believed could be harvested, processed, and utilized. In that sense, what happened to those boarders transcended mere murder. They were not simply killed, but systematically processed, their vital essences extracted with deliberate precision while they remained at least partially aware of their fate. The road passing the former site of the Raven's Perch has been widened and repaved many times over the decades. Modern travelers speed past without a second glance, unaware of what once occurred there. Perhaps that ignorance is merciful. Some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed again. Some methodologies, once understood, cannot be forgotten, and some appetites, once awakened, may never truly be satisfied, only temporarily appeased. The question that haunts those few who know the complete story is not whether Dorothea Caldwell's experiments ended with her apparent death, but whether they continued through others who may have discovered her methods. The systematic nature of her approach, the scientific precision of her documentation, suggests knowledge that could be transmitted, replicated, refined. If so, there may be other establishments where guests check in but never truly depart, where what happens behind closed doors is indeed worse than anyone might recall or dare to imagine.